Yeah, this evening it's my pleasure to introduce Don McKenney. He was born in the early 1940s in Van Nuys, California, which is now the heart of San Fernando Valley. The block where he grew up on was orange groves and grape vineyards. He says it was just great fun for a little kid and his best pal. After university and 2 years in India in the Peace Corps, Don decided to stay in Berkeley, California. It didn't take him too long to find the Crossing Gate Hobby Shop and settled into modeling in On3. His two favorite railroads were the West Side Lumber Company and the South Pacific Coast. This is about 1980. Cliff and Dave Grant befriended Don and helped him get to the 1984 National Narrow Gauge Convention in Denver, where Don won a first place and two third place awards. Don's been building models and railroads ever since. Don has shared his work in the Logging, Mining, Industrial Annuals, Timber Times, and he was an associate editor for 15 years of that magazine, the Narrow Gauge and Short Line Gazette, and most recently, Narrow Gauge Down Under. Don started his first layout, the Mill Valley Lumber Company, in the year 2000, and he finished it in 2010. That railroad is the subject of his talk today. Don, it's all yours.
Okay, hopefully this is all going to work out. My name is Don McKenney. We're going to take a look at my lumber layout. It's a freelance On3 layout showing lumber operations somewhere in Northern California in the late 19th century. We're going to jump in this crew car here, maybe a little crowded, so might have to do a little age piche, as they say in India. This is my logo for the Mill Valley Lumber Company. It's pretty much everything is scratch built, and I designed the logo too, and the late Jim Oliver made them into decals. So off we go here. Grab your snooze bags. This is kind of the vision that informed me while I was building it, and that the main thing that I discovered as I went along was it's really important to have a story and stick to it and build to it. So my story simply is the mill to the woods empties up, loads down. It's just a 10 foot by 10 foot spare bedroom. But I had the sense that I could get quite a bit into it. And one thing that I really wanted to be able to do was not only show the elements, the main elements of logging, but also be able to steam the locomotives over, kind of a little, have a sense that they were moving through quite a bit of territory. And I think I did that, and we'll see how. Little helpful things, all the elements should support your story. Be mindful of Occam's razor, less is more, and keep it simple. It's kind of what I found, it's a matter of wants versus needs. Identify your needs and ruthlessly stick to them, and try not to get distracted by too many of your wants. Show the key. This is one thing that I wanted to do. It may not inform what you're doing, but I wanted to show the four key elements of my logging railroad and show them in proper proportion to one another. The figures compared to the logos, the locos compared to the structures, and the structures compared to the big trees. This is something that all of you may have experienced, and I finally tried to put it into words. It's kind of a Zen thing. One's sense of happiness and accomplishment will be in direct proportion to one's devotion to doing one's best modeling. So it's going to take a little bit of work, but I think all of us, as we work along, we get in that thing they now call flow. I just call it kind of the Zen of modeling. And, we find we're really happy when we spend, whether it's an hour or a day at it. This is my layout plan. So you enter at the top, and the first wall there to your left as you enter, to the right in the photograph the drawing there is that whole wall is the mill scene. And then as you come around the bend to the first wall, you get into kind of the countryside. It's still on the same level as the mill, and it splits off into two lines. I was kind of thinking for operations, if you wanted to get two guys able to operate in here, you might need a route going up, two routes going up and down. So you could, one guy could do the empties up and the other fellow operator could do loads down. So the line that is closest to the wall there is a 7% grade up to that trestle and log bridge on the third wall. And there it enters, or as it comes up the trestle, really, it starts to enter the forest, and we'll be seeing in the photographs of the layout smaller trees, but they're going to be big trees. And the lower level there, or the route that's closest to the benchwork, to the aisle, it actually fords the creek and goes behind the scenery up in kind of a trough on another 7% grade and ties in with the other route after it gets up on the fourth wall there. So then it comes out on the peninsula, which is kind of the reload scene. And then there are a couple little scenes as you exit on the opposite side, the entry side of that peninsula. And you see that dark shadow that moves up the length of the peninsula. That's a kind of a scenery divider of a tall ridge that runs along the peninsula there, and that is tall enough at that point to keep anybody entering the layout room from seeing any of the rest of the layout. So that helps to focus, where you want them to start looking as they come in. And so we're going to enter the layout room and move down that first wall here. And you're going to see the influences of the West Side Lumber Company, as Dave mentioned, and my favorite builders of railroad equipment, the Carter brothers. And that's the sawdust burner for the mill. And I usually, that's kind of one of the few tracks that at the rear there where I can park something to show it off a little. And I made a model of the Hammond pile driver that Al Armitage did the plans for in an early Gazette. And I needed a moving car to carry it around. I also built a big donkey that needed the moving car as well. But this is a 40-foot heavy duty, all wood, 16-wheel, 4-truck donkey moving car. So this is in front of, as you can see the pile driver in the background there, this is in front of the sawdust burner is the log dump into the mill pond. And these are they? Maybe, I'm not sure. They're probably 10, 12, 10-foot diameter logs. But these are from New Zealand tea trees, which make really great logs for oatskin. And this is that same view, but without the logs. So you can see the early Dolbear donkey, which is too small to work in the woods anymore, but does a good job of running the log dump. And then moving on down that wall is the chip bin. And you can see the conveyors. The farther away one is for the sawdust burner, and the closer one is for the chip bin coming up from the mill. And there's a wagon there that I scratch built that carries chips around uh, the world of the sawmill to supply wood burning stoves and whatever else, donkeys, whatever else they need chips for. And this is one of the logging engines. I've got small Climaxes, Shays, one Heisler, and the Porter. And I'm running dead rail on my railroad, which is pretty neat to do and saves a lot of backbreaking wiring, of course. But one of the problems is the Shays, geared engines, fairly small, and there's only room enough to have your decoder in there and a sugar cube speaker. So the battery components, the LiPo battery and the RC components, you need to put in a following car. And my philosophy for doing that is to build an interesting car so that when folks, viewers, look at your trains and they know something about battery power, they don't go looking at kind of something you've cobbled together overnight and say, oh, that's for the batteries, you know, otherwise, you know, we wouldn't be seeing it there. So the battery is in that first rectangle. LiPo battery, you can get a pretty good sized battery. It'll go for about an hour and a half, 2 hours. And in the other rear rectangular car are the RC components. And the west side had a 3-tank car, but theirs was kind of the reverse of this, with 2 cylindrical ones on the ends and the rectangular one in the middle. And then the other nifty thing is, if the front one with the battery, you can lift up the lid on that tank, and there's the recharge plug, so you don't have to take things apart to recharge the battery. Here's another example of an interesting battery car. I made these for another railroad. I made some, the South Pacific Coast, they loan their caboose to my Mill Valley Lumber Company because they have 4 of them. But it's kind of a shorty combine. And so the battery components, the RC components, are in the front part of the car, the freight section. And you can get good sized battery in there. And then this behind is a small equipment flat, also being used by some Indian women, Native American women, to hitch a ride up to the woods to pick blackberries or whatever, and then hitch a ride down at the end of the day. And then they don't have to sit up with the sweaty loggers, which they probably wouldn't want to do anyway. Missed the fire shed there. That's the fire shed with some equipment. Every mill needs a fire shed. They all seem to burn down. And this is the section shed. And you see it's been repaired in the front where the crew was a little too boisterous pushing the hand car back in there and smashed it out a little bit. And I actually took that idea from an actual section shed on a railroad. I saw a photograph of it. And you also start to see the main building with the jack slip coming up onto the cutting floor, lifting logs out of the mill pond. And this is reverse angle on the main mill, and you can see the main part of it you're looking at is the boiler house. The foreground is the pump house, which sits mostly at the end of the mill pond. And then you can see down between the pump house and the wagon wheel a pipe that feeds the water into the water tank that serves the mill, which we'll get to pretty quick here. And I built some heavy freight wagons from a book. You can find these books that show nothing but plans for wagons from the 19th century. It had this one had it was a photograph of an actual wagon that looked like this. And it had this limb that was kind of tied down on the top. And eventually I figured out that it was a chain tensioner to keep the chains that were holding the load in there tight. That was pretty nifty. There's kind of a reverse view, another light freight wagon there, and other kind of typical details you might find in a mill yard. This is looking down the tracks that serve the mill yard, and a string of empties, disconnect log trucks that are going to be pushed up to the woods. You can see another example of the fire equipment in front of the section shed. That's a chemical fire extinguisher that used soda bicarbonate and acid to, and once you twisted that thing on the top down to break the glass, then the whole thing shot out. So you better be where you need to be to hit the fire. You can see the stub switches that I used. And there's the jack slip and a train passing underneath it, and a dramatic layout opportunity. And the large tank that feeds the boiler house, that was a similar, I don't remember what he called it. Tom York did a water tank that looked something like that, but I expanded the plans for that half again bigger to get a nice tall, a bigger tank that would be appropriate to serve a sawmill. And then just behind the jack slip is the sinker barge. And you can also see a box of, below the hand car, you can see a box of spare chain dogs. Another shot of some of the details around the mill. And so there's a kind of a scenic, something to scenically hide the corner of the room, which is what you'd otherwise be looking at as you turn the corner onto the second wall. There's the close-up of the sinker barge and the pump house, the freight wagon behind it, and just the start of the freight and mill office. And then I just wanted to feature one of my fun cars. It's a blacksmith car with a hearth that I built from scratch and did the brickwork, and it's got a jib crane to for a little heavy lifting, kind of AAA for logging, I suppose. And you can see the drainage pipe there on the mill pond. This is the mill office and freight, receiving freight for the mill, and a loading dock on the other side of the track. A little close-up view of the mill office. That was an interesting kind of structure challenge that I took up, because most of the kits, uh, I guess all of them really, uh, that do, rock work or brickwork for a building, you've got 4 walls to put together and that seam that goes down there that you're always figuring out how you might hide it. So I made forms out of acrylic, sheet acrylic, and cut them to the size of the walls, and then put little pieces, holding pieces for the windows where they belonged, and put the wood lintels in there too, and then poured the plaster, and then slipped the acrylic forms off, and carved all the rock work, and you got a building that's made or looks the way it was made without any funny corner seams. You also a couple pigs in the background, a skunk on the left corner of the building, and another skunk by the staircase. More fire equipment. And coming around to the end of the office building, and the company logo on a sign there in the middle of the photograph. There's a dirt road that crosses that King Post bridge, and we'll see it go along the front of the second wall while the tracks go along the back. And this is right where the tracks split. You can see there in the photograph. And one track starts up a grade, the one closer to the wall, and the one closer to the front of the layout just goes along level with the bench work. Now here's a Shea work train heading up. And he's going to be heading up the grade, which is about a 7 or 8% grade that goes along the whole wall there, and another heavy wagon with a load of cross ties, I think. And here's a load of empty disconnects heading up. I just like this view because a lot of times if you can get your camera down on the level of the track, it really sucks you right into the picture in a dramatic way. So here's some loads coming down the grade. You can see the track heading up. And this is along the front of the second wall there where that road climbs a ridge that partially hides the track in the background. And when I was looking through that a book of wagon plans, I came across a bakery wagon where it was easy to imagine putting some bars and screens on it. And I put a heavy back door into that model and scratch built this paddy wagon. I imagined that the loggers worked as they did 6 days a week. They had 1 day a week to kind of wind down or go to church. And then some of them would wind down by drinking most of the day and getting in trouble and ending up, on the work crew in the paddy wagon. And I used some figures from 1/48 scale plastic kits of flight crews and kind of used epoxy putty to make a sheriff and 2 deputies and a couple of the miscreants. And the guy on the left, interestingly, another hobby of mine is military history, but that's Hans Joachim Marseille. These figures were sculpted in Korea, and they really go to a great deal of work to make actual people. And Marseille was a famous Luftwaffe pilot in North Africa, and he is not looking like he's gonna do any work if he can help it. This is further along is the first water tank, which is to me the classic logging water tank you might want to model. Friend of mine up in Canada that many of you may be familiar with, Tom Beaton. He was over on Vancouver Island and found this water tank at a place called Was. Oh, I know how to get rid of this. Nope, I guess I can't. Here's another view of it. It's built up on the hillside with a little platform coming out to where the tracks are and the spout is. Neat water tank. And the pump house partly in the creek bed, and you can see the 7% grade for the line that's going up into the woods. And the start of kind of second growth big trees there. And there's the log bridge, and you can see the lower line that's going to pass behind the scenery as it hits the third wall, which we see behind us. And the rails are fording the creek bed there. And I managed to pour that so it covered the ties, but not the rails. So it actually works. This is all made with, let's see, acrylic gloss medium. You paint the surface underneath it, and then you just have to pour about 1/8 of an inch of this stuff, and it makes really great water. You can use that tube clear caulking, acrylic caulking for the waterfalls. And it's very easy to use. It's thick, so it does spread out fine, but it won't go through a little hole like that epoxy stuff and spill all over the place if it finds a pinhole. So I swear by that stuff. This is some loads coming down. And if you're familiar with logging, they always put the loads or the empties or whatever ahead of the locomotive downgrade so that you didn't get any runaways flying down into the mill area, the mill yard. And crossing the bridge is the bridge tender shack, built to plans for the West Side Mill tender shack. And then I also located the second water tank there and a kind of fueling facility for speeders. And you can see how now that we're up in the mountains, there's more rock work, and over in the left corner, a little bit of a retaining wall or part of a bigger retaining wall there. So that you really get the feeling with the trees and the rock work and retaining walls that you are up in the hills. And kind of keep in mind that once we left that first wall with all the mill structures, structure-wise, there's not that much happening. So you get a feeling for the little shays steaming their way along to get out to the log loading area. So this is the crew car heading along the back wall. And once it gets around this curve, it'll be on the peninsula. And holding up part of the track work is what they called a pigsty bridge. And looking down at the bottom of the picture, you can see a donkey carrying some supplies and maybe the hat of his owner. But you start to get a sense of, you know, the proportionality between the animals and people and the railroad equipment and the structures in the big trees, and how the big trees really outsize everything by a long shot. There's the third water tank curling out onto the peninsula. and a retaining wall. And the first donkey is a two-drum donkey. You can see the fair lead on the front of the donkey, and that is yarding some logs into the reload. And the A-frame part of it is running the loading of the log cars for the skid road here. And I wanted to show a skid road because they were a part of the early logging of the big trees, but they just couldn't handle very much until somebody got the idea of using donkeys and steam power. But there's still one operating down here. And this is a single drum A-frame loading one of the logs that have been yarded into the reload onto some disconnects. And you can see the one in the background that is yarding the logs, and also on the A-frame part of it running that reload for the skid road. There's both of them, both the types of log cars being loaded up. And you can see the screen, the divider, the scenic divider, the ridge line there that keeps people that are coming in from seeing the rest of the layout. And then we're now at the end of the reload there in the peninsula, and this is looking down the aisleway of the peninsula just to get kind of a a good look at how big the trees were and how they were majestic in size compared to everything else that was happening. You can see that little donkey down in the lower left area there, the little donkey, supply donkey with his owner there, and how big the trees are by comparison. Also in that middle tree, if you move your eyes up that tree trunk to the first branch that's leafless or coneless or whatever. This is my daughter made an eagle for me that's either landing or taking off there. And as we come around the peninsula onto the entry side, there's a track that comes around that back corner, a branch through a cut in that scenic divider, and a second pile driver. It's kind of freelance pile driver just from pictures of pile drivers and some of the details that I wanted to include on it that I liked. And they're extending the track out into a new stand of trees to be logged as soon as they finish in this area. And this tree on the right is being cut down. So I wanted to have a felling scene. And here it is. You can see the trestle in the background with the pile driver on it, and they're posing for a photograph having finished that back cut there, where they make a big wedge to aim the tree where it's going to fall. And they're just starting on the cross cut on the left-hand side of the tree. You can see the saw has just been started into the tree. And the loggers, I mean, I can't imagine working from dawn to dusk for 3 weeks is about what it took them to get that big a tree with the back cut in it. And they had to produce bigger axes than what was available when they got there, because that's what they needed for this size tree to cut it down. And you can see the staging boards And on the left-hand side of the tree, just above the crosscut saw, you can see a kerosene bottle, which the loggers put a little hook on there, tied a hook onto it so they could have it handy to splash some kerosene on the saw so it wouldn't get stuck from the sap as they went into it. And that's the end of the line, guys. Little, oh, that's a logging, that's the bigger donkey. And I just had it here because I wanted to show you the fair lead that I built. It's actually from a plan for a Willamette heavy duty number 1801 double drum fair lead, which I think a bigger donkey needed that, and there wasn't anything commercially available. And it is not, it looks complicated to build when you look at the plan or a photograph of it. Here's another picture of it. Anyway, that was fun to build.
The first comment in there was from Robin Peel, and he says, "I love the dog in the shay." So one of your photos had a dog sitting in the gangway of the shay, and that tickled his fancy, I think.
Me too.
Jim Brown says, "Masterful attention to detail. I can almost smell the fresh cut lumber." One thumb up. Phil Sellinger said, "Those wagons are impressive. Wow." Question from Pete Smith. Who or what is the title and author of that wagon book? So I think you've got a devotee out here, Tom.
It was Dover Press, and I have his email now, and I'll let him know who the author was. Or I think Dover made a whole bunch of softcover books about various, things that people might be interested in, and wagons was one of them.
Yeah, Steve Hollenbeck asks, how many log cars did you make?
Yeah, those were big projects. Usually if I'm making something that I like, I'll make at least 2 of them, sometimes 3. And with the log cars, I knew I needed a string. So how many did I make? I made 7 or 10.
Okay. See, Russ Segner says, beautiful individual scenes, lots of detail, very small in a very small space. Steve Hollenbeck comes back again after seeing your oxen, and he says, those are great oxen.
Okay. Well, those are commercial, actually. They're Artista, I think, if I remember right.
Okay. And Kevin Barnett says, beautiful models and some really nice scenes. Impressive.
Thank you.
Yeah, Jim Brown says, the majesty of the trees is really impressive.
Yeah, I wanted to go for that. I went for as much room as I had between the benchwork and the ceiling. And the benchwork, I should point out, is at eye level, which, gets the viewer into the scene just like the camera does.
Thank you so much for your presentation tonight. Outstanding layout, very impressive. I would love to see it in person sometime.
You're welcome.